Welcome to our 6th day of this novena, introducing the story of Dona Lucilia Correia de Oliveira. And today we're going to be talking about the history, but also the circumstances of her trip to Europe. This trip to Europe will be incredibly important when we look at the whole of Dona Lucilia's life. Why? Suffering has an element to it which truly brings out the best, or unfortunately the worst in people. And with Dona Lucilia, it brought out the aspects of her soul which were tending towards sanctity, if not already there. So, what was the situation? 1912. She is afflicted with gallstones, an affliction that today is rather common. But gallstones are terrible when there is no means of treatment. So what are the symptoms of this disease? Like many diseases today, it was a deadly disease at the time. So what are they? Gripping pain, long or short duration, sudden onsets, swelling of the liver, and a sensation of a feeling of sickness, which is overwhelming. If it's not treated, the gallbladder can become infected, become septic, and the patient can die, which was unfortunately at the beginning of the century was a common fate for many people. The problem with this is that it had arrived at a zenith with her. It had arrived at a point where she was unable to be active. She wasn't able to tend to her children, tend to her function as a wife, as a mother. And her brother-in-law discovered in a magazine from Germany that the personal physician of the Kaiser had developed a means to operate on the gallbladder with a very good success. So the family gathered around and they planned a trip, a family trip to Europe, to Germany, to have their daughter, sister, cousin looked and cared for at this hospital. But the trip was going to be arduous. Think about it today, if you're able to. Flying from the newer continents of North or South America to Europe would be a trip of some hours. But now this is a trip of days, not weeks, across the ocean. She was so sick that the captain ordered that they make a coffin for Frau Correia de Oliveira, because he saw how ill she was and he was afraid that she was going to die in her way. The brother of Dona Lucilia sees that they're making a coffin, sees who it is for, and tells them to throw it overboard because his sister is not going to die. This journey is a journey for some of great luxury and beauty and comfort. But for her, it was agony, absolute agony, unable to find a position to sit, stand, or sleep. But what's interesting, not a word of discomfort. But more than that, her doing good to everyone around her. There is a cousin, a nephew of hers, Tito. And Tito was this terrible child, enfant terrible. He's a terrible child, in which the family would send to Dona Lucilia because she had an ability of imparting peace, tranquility, and giving anyone who was in contact with her a sensation of tranquility. And she would talk with Tito, calm Tito, give him the right direction. Now, boys are not girls, and boys tend to say what enters their minds. They tend to use more of an intellect position than necessarily an emotional one, and not reading the emotional cues as well as some others. Boys tend to get themselves into a lot of trouble. It gets so bad, Tito goes to his aunt and says, "They all say you're going to die, but I don't want you to die." You can imagine that with tears and anguish. This boy who's finally found somebody to put him in the right place. And what does she say? "My child, don't worry. I won't die." And calms him. But so much so that he becomes a different type of child. When he arrives in Germany, they go directly to Berlin. And she is in a situation where she's lying down. She's in a terrible situation. The family goes to a hotel. She goes directly to the hospital. Now, this hospital was considered one of the best in Berlin. It was the hospital of the Kaiser. It was the hospital, the Frederick William Royal University Polyclinic, which is a typical name of one of those hospitals at the beginning of during the Belle Epoque. In her condition, her attitude was always one of firmness, stability, continuality, and determination. Think about it. When you're in the situation of continual pain, the natural way is to snap, is to become angry with small things, to be temperamental. But no, we have Dona Lucilia who is able to moderate and to harmonize the many people around her. So much so that her own family recognizes this position. She goes into the operation under so much risks, and this doctor, Dr. Beer, ends up being that this would be his second gallbladder surgery. Much ado about his first one, but being the second puts you into a difficult position. The surgery is successful, but the situation that she's put in post-surgery, the trials and tribulations of recovery, the pain, anesthesia which didn't exist, took her dark hair and streaked it with white within 1 week. That's what type of pain she was put into. But her attitude was that of resignation. How many of us, when we suffer, are resigned? That shows an attitude of sanctity. The most common attitude is one of revolt, is one of anger. It's one of so many human appetites. There's a beautiful little case that I wanted to tell you about. And this one here shows you how she was with those around her. She has this nurse, Germanic, cold, stiff, touch cruel, and comes to her saying that by order of the doctor she must drink this certain type of soup, brain soup. Just the name of it is disgusting. But Dona Lucilia couldn't drink it. It couldn't eat it. Couldn't stomach it. And in her condition, you would imagine that they would be doing everything to be accommodating to her. But here, on the contrary, they're accommodating to themselves. She tries one way, she tries another to tell them that she can't eat this soup. In the end, the nurse orders it. And the nurse refuses. The tyranny of this nurse is terrible because a person post-operation with all of the damage done to the internal organs cannot suffer eating something which does not agree. The condition worsens her condition. And the doctor who's supposed to be there isn't there. The nurse isn't at her post during the evening. They finally get another doctor from a different wing. So in the morning, Dr. Beer goes around to do his morning rounds, only to find out that his patient, the second one who did the gallbladder surgery, is far worse than she was in the morning, the day before. The tyrant is there holding her hands, gripping her hands, knowing that if the patient tells what had happened, she will lose her job. Not only her, but all of the orderlies on that line will be sent off to some godforsaken place in some colony of Germany, some island in the Pacific, or something worse. Dona Lucilia doesn't lie, but she does everything to protect her executioner. And she says enough that guards them without going too far. Afterwards, the nurse thanks her because she could have done. Imagine the human attitude here. You put me through that, now I'm going to put you through it. But you see the stamp of heroic virtue, the element in which she's showing what she truly had within her. When a person is this sick, you see the real person. Appearances fall away. Now the next story is kind of funny, in which Dr. Beer starts to converse with this patient, in which is known as the Brazilian. And he comes to her and says to her, I was speaking with the Kaiser, and more than once we're talking about the idea of landing troops in Brazil. To the patriotic Lucilia, this is a horror. Remembering that Lucilia spoke English and French, and she would communicate with her doctors in one of those two languages. She didn't speak German. And Dr. Beer continues with his ideas and what have you about Brazil, and she in turn, with true patriotism, comes out and says, listen to me, doctor. Our forests are treacherous, and you will have to occupy all of them if you plan on keeping any of the territory. The natives have poisonous darts. Brazil will defend itself. Her nieces and nephews will later on recount to many other people that whenever she would tell the story, she would pulsate with a true love of her own home country. Later, the next day, the doctor came by and said, Madam, I bring you greetings from the Kaiser. And she turned and said, why? The Kaiser sends his greetings because he has always been a great admirer of patriotic ladies. I told him what your thoughts were about a possible invasion of Brazil, and he was pleased because the obstacles you mentioned had never occurred to him. Dona Lucilia will respond in a manner which you might find funny. A lady lying in her bed under a tremendous amount of pain, and she says, I do not want his greetings. But what's interesting is that she always kept very cordial relations with the doctor, Dr. Beer, as she did with most people. But from this point, having this element of pain, one can very easily fall into discouragement. Losing courage is human. It's an emotional situation. The many side effects of her operation, the pains that she would have in her stomach, the pain in her own body, imagine. She even acquired a new one, which was a pain in her very feet, and which caused her to wear a type of metal slipper to give better support to her feet. All of these terrible things will cause her suffering. She later goes and she's sent to a water cure along the Rhine to recuperate. And she always recounted how the Germans did things and how it was so clean and orderly and organized. When she was there, she met a Polish count and countess, and they befriended the family as they were all probably ill with one thing or another. And they went to her and they said they took a liking to her son Plinio. And they said to him, we'd like to take him back to Poland. And there we have a castle and we have many things. And we'd like to bring him back with us. And what's interesting about it is her love for her children, but also her son's love for her. And why? Because he saw in her this very reflection of her virtue. The last remark delighted her, and she repeated it to many people until the moment of her death. She says, "Your son loves you dearly, madam. We did everything we could. We made him all sorts of promises to convince him to come with us to Poland, but he stood firm. He utterly refuses to go without you." The love of her children towards her was based on this virtuous conduct in which she brought her children up, but how she was amongst all her people. After they finished their water cure, they went to Paris. At that time, Brazil and the little São Paulo of that time, culture was very connected to Paris. And Paris was the center of the Belle Epoque and everything else. But this was something that will mark the young Plinio very much and will help Dona Lucilia in her recovery. But what was very beautiful is the occasion that little Plinio goes to this area called Rond-Point. And Rond-Point is where they would have puppets, a puppet show of sorts, in which they have dialogues. The little Plinio would see these puppets and there would be dialogues and everything else. And he would begin to speak out loud and argue with the puppets, the puppet master, of course, about what he was doing was wrong and why it was a sin and why it was evil what he was doing. And all of these points, one after another after another. And it became a thing that every day Plinio would go there and argue with the puppet master. And until one point, the performance began and two little ones were there. And all of a sudden, this crocodile comes out. And the crocodile eats the priest. And little Plinio was indignant. How dare the crocodile touch the priest? And he would continue and argue. And little Plinio would climb up on the chair and brandish his finger and shook it and saying the crocodile's a liar. It's not true. Ce n'est pas vrai. Ce n'est pas vrai. Again and again and again. What was interesting And we'll see in a little bit that this became the word in that area of Paris. To go there and see this little Brazilian boy arguing that they should not touch the priest. Remember, this is anti-clerical Paris at this time. Little boy with the spark of faith in a sea or morass of impiety. A little later, Dona Lucilia, as a special event, brought her two children to a very famous pasticcerie called Marquise de Sévigné. And they picked out some different cakes. His sister Jose would pick out some sweets, some chocolates, some bonbons. And her son Plinio would pick out a chocolate cake with coffee. And as they're walking, his mother, always very delicate on these points, made her son, who was more than willing to start on their way home, stop, come back and say, a gentleman always carries the packages of a lady. So carry your sister's packages. No matter how many families we have around us today, where this sense of respect and good manners does not exist. Amongst siblings, or amongst children and their mothers, this sense of respect, how much does it not exist? And all of a sudden, as they're walking down the road and Plinio's got both packages in his hands, this man, gentleman, finely dressed, comes up and gives a signal with his head to Dona Lucilia as though he was going to do a prank. And with the little signal, he comes up and he says, "Way, thank you very much. You are most kind. I am much obliged with the gift that you have given me." Now imagine we have a young Plinio of 6, 7 years old, and this man, adult, comes, takes his cakes from him. And then he starts walking off. Little Plinio runs after the man, grabs him by the legs to stop him, and he says, "What are you doing? It is not right." And he goes, "How so? You gave me the sweets." Little Plinio taught on the knee of Dona Lucilia. It's very important, this point. It's not that this offense was against him, how he was going to lose his cake, how many children would have cried or had a temper tantrum because of that. It was a question of right and wrong, a question of morality, a question of what was correct. And he goes off and he says, "No, you're committing two sins. The first one, you are stealing, since I did not give you these sweets. And the second, you are lying, saying I gave them to you when I did no such thing. Give them back, please, because they are not yours." After this parley between the man and little Plinio, the man returned the packages. Turning to Dona Lucilia, he doffed his hat and paid her a compliment. "Madam, your son is enchanting. Every morning I take a break from work to stop by Rond-Point to watch his debates at the puppet theater. I congratulate you on your son." That is the handiwork of Dona Lucilia, bringing up her children that had a supreme moral sense. The next thing will shape her son Plinio, which is Versailles. But unfortunately today we don't have enough to get through all of this. We have so much to get through, but we don't. Dona Lucilia meets with this young Russian princess. This young Russian princess is distraught. She has nowhere to go. And nowhere to go, she looks for the kind lady on the same level, on the same flat, and goes to her and pours out her heart. And in pouring out her heart, tells her the diagnoses that the doctors have given, which was cancer. With some treatments, primitive treatments that they had, and with those primitive treatments, very little chance of success. And the woman is brokenhearted. And she said, "Madam, forgive me. I know I have no right to speak to you like this. We don't even know each other. But by the look and your demeanor, I can see that you are very kind and compassionate. I'm in a plight. Would you permit me to unburden myself upon you?" One of the aspects of Dona Lucilia throughout her life was just that. She would be the one, the shoulder, for others to cry on. After she hears the plight of this young princess, she tells her, she said this, "Don't lose hope. Sometimes doctors are wrong. They are not infallible. One doctor can disprove the diagnosis of another. I heard there is an excellent physician in that field in Switzerland. If you go there, visit him, who knows?" Not only did it come with consolation, but it gave hope to this woman. And later, though she had setbacks, she found out the diagnosis was completely wrong. And with that, she lived her life. How many times did she do that to so many people? So I could go on for a lot longer, but unfortunately in our novena, I don't have time. But hopefully you'll come back tomorrow for another snippet, little drop, little bit for you of the life of Dona Lucilia, and see how she can help you in your life and be a source of consolation in the difficulties and pains that you may go through in your life. And with that, pray for her intercession. May God bless you.